Jonas stormed into the old barn and yanked the heavy tarp off the truck bed with a grunt of frustration. There lay his son Elijah, whispering desperately, "Dad, I can't breathe," while holding hands with another young man. The afternoon light poured through the dusty windows and caught the fear in Elijah's eyes. Jonas froze, his calloused fingers still gripping the edge of the tarp. For a moment, the only sound was the distant lowing of cattle in the pasture. Elijah sat up slowly, his face pale and his shirt rumpled from hiding. The other man, Tyler, a quiet ranch hand from the next county, looked away in shame. Jonas felt the ground tilt beneath his boots as years of strict rules crashed down. He had raised Elijah to be a man who worked the land and honored God and family. Now everything he believed seemed to crack open like dry Iowa soil in drought. Elijah stood on shaky legs and tried to speak, but his voice broke into silence. Jonas turned without a word and walked out into the bright sunlight that suddenly felt too harsh. Back at the farmhouse, he slammed the screen door so hard the hinges rattled. His wife had passed 5 years earlier, leaving him to raise their only son alone. He had taught Elijah to hunt, to fix tractors, and to never show weakness. Now the secret Elijah carried made Jonas question every lesson he had ever given. That night the supper table stayed empty and the silence pressed down like summer heat. Elijah stayed in his room, packing a small duffel bag with trembling hands. He remembered the first time he met Tyler at the county fair 2 summers ago. They had talked about crops and dreams under the Ferris wheel lights until midnight. Since then they stole moments in the barn or behind the old silo, careful not to be seen. Elijah loved the farm as much as his father, but he could not love the lie anymore. The next morning Jonas found the tarp still crumpled on the barn floor like evidence. He kicked it aside and stared at the empty truck bed where everything had changed. Work on the farm continued, but every chore felt heavier than the day before. Jonas barked orders at the hired hands and avoided looking toward Elijah's room. Elijah tried once to explain over breakfast, but Jonas cut him off with a cold stare. "You are not my son if you live like that," he said, the words slicing deep. Elijah left the table and drove the old pickup into town without another word. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the house grew thick as morning fog. Jonas attended church on Sunday and prayed for guidance, but the answers never came. He remembered his own father, who had disowned a cousin for similar reasons long ago. The farm accounts showed red ink, and Jonas realized Elijah had been balancing the books. Without his son, the daily operations began to slip through his stubborn fingers. One evening a storm rolled across the fields and lightning split the sky open. Jonas stood on the porch watching the rain wash away the dust of the day. He wondered where Elijah had gone and whether the boy was safe in the downpour. Tyler had left the county too, taking a job up north to give Elijah space. The loneliness settled into Jonas's bones, heavier than any bale of hay he had lifted. He found an old photo album in the attic and flipped through pictures of Elijah as a boy, smiling at the camera with a missing front tooth and a baseball glove in his hand. Tears blurred the images, and Jonas closed the book with shaking hands. The following week a phone call came from the hospital 50 miles away. Elijah had been in a car accident on the interstate after driving through the night. Jonas drove there faster than he had ever driven in his life, his heart pounding. In the sterile room, Elijah lay bandaged, but awake, his eyes meeting his father's. The machines beeped steadily, and the smell of antiseptic hung in the air. Jonas sat beside the bed for the first time in weeks without anger in his voice. "I pulled that tarp because I suspected something," he admitted, his words raw. "But I never imagined how much it would hurt to lose you even for a minute." Elijah listened quietly, his hand resting on the white hospital sheet. Tyler had visited earlier and left flowers that now brightened the windowsill. Jonas looked at the bouquet and felt a strange warmth replace the old bitterness. "I was wrong about a lot of things, son," he said, the confession lifting years of weight. "The farm needs you, and more than that, I need you to be who you are." Elijah's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of relief, not fear. They talked for hours about the past and the future, the land and the heart. Jonas promised to learn and to listen even when the lessons were hard. Weeks later, Elijah returned to the farm with Tyler beside him as an equal. The 3 men worked the fields together under the same bright Iowa sky. The tarp stayed folded in the barn, a reminder of the day truth finally breathed free. Healing came slowly like new green shoots after a hard winter on the prairie. Jonas still attended church, but now he prayed for understanding instead of judgment. The farm thrived again with Elijah's ideas and Tyler's steady hands helping out. Evenings on the porch held laughter and stories instead of heavy silence. Jonas watched his son laugh with Tyler and felt pride bloom where shame once lived. Life on the farm settled into a new rhythm rooted in love and honesty. The rolling hills stretched out unchanged, yet everything inside the family had shifted. Jonas knew the road ahead would have bumps, but he was ready to walk it. Elijah stood taller, now no longer whispering or hiding who he truly was. The accident had been a wake-up call that shook the foundation of Jonas's beliefs. He spent long nights replaying the moment. He pulled that tarp and saw the truth. Every memory of Elijah's childhood now carried new colors he had never noticed before. The way his son helped with the calves and still found time to read poetry. Jonas had called it softness back then, but now he saw it as strength. The hired hands noticed the change, and the atmosphere around the barn lightened. Elijah and Tyler worked side by side repairing fences and baling hay without fear. They shared quiet glances and gentle jokes that Jonas pretended not to see at first. Over time, he joined their conversations and even asked Tyler about his family. The young man spoke of a supportive mother back east and dreams of owning land someday. Jonas listened and realized that love looked different, but it still built things that lasted. One crisp autumn morning, they harvested the last corn and shared a meal in the field. Jonas raised his coffee cup and said to both young men, "You belong here." Elijah smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. The farmhouse felt warmer with 2 extra chairs at the table every evening. Neighbors whispered at first, but Jonas held his head high and kept working. He had lost enough time to pride, and he refused to lose any more. Winter came, and the snow blanketed the fields in quiet white peace. Inside the house, they planned for spring planting and talked about the future openly. Jonas even attended a support group in town for parents learning to understand. He shared his story haltingly at first, but the words grew easier each time. Elijah watched his father change and felt the last knots of resentment loosen. Tyler became like another son, helping Jonas fix the old tractor on cold afternoons. The 3 of them laughed when the engine finally roared back to life together. Spring arrived with soft rains that made the soil rich and ready for seeds. They planted new rows of soybeans and talked about expanding the herd next year. Jonas stood at the edge of the field one evening watching the sunset paint the sky. He thought about the tarp and the whisper that had shattered his old world. Now that same world felt bigger and kinder than he had ever imagined possible. Elijah walked up beside him and placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "Thanks for pulling that tarp, Dad," he said softly, the words full of meaning. Jonas nodded, his throat tight with emotion he no longer tried to hide. The farm continued its steady cycle of seasons, and the family grew stronger. Letters arrived from distant relatives who heard the story and offered quiet support. Jonas framed a new photo of the 3 men standing in front of the barn. It hung in the living room where the old family Bible used to be the only decoration. Life moved forward, one honest conversation at a time, one repaired fence at a time. The pain of the past became a scar that reminded them of their resilience. Elijah no longer whispered, he spoke his truth clearly and lived it fully. Tyler found his place on the land and in the hearts of those around him. Jonas discovered that love was not a rule book, but a wide, open field. The cattle grazed peacefully under the vast American sky, and all seemed right. Yet Jonas sometimes still woke at night, remembering the fear in his son's voice. He would walk to the barn and touch the folded tarp as a silent promise. Never again would he let fear cover what mattered most in his life. The community slowly warmed to the new reality as they saw the farm prosper. At the county fair that summer, the 3 men entered their prize bull together. They won first place and celebrated with laughter that echoed across the fairgrounds. Jonas felt a deep contentment he had not known since his wife was alive. He realized family was not about perfection, but about choosing each other daily. Elijah and Tyler talked about building a small cabin on the back 40 acres. Jonas offered his blessing and even helped draw up the simple plans one evening. The future stretched ahead, bright and full of possibility for all of them. The old truck still sat in the barn, but now it carried new memories of healing. Jonas drove it into town, sometimes with Elijah and Tyler in the cab beside him. They stopped for ice cream, and waved to neighbors who no longer stared. The whisper that once meant panic now echoed as a call to breathe freely. The farm had become a place where truth could grow, just like the crops. Jonas looked at his son and felt grateful for the second chance he had been given. Life on the prairie taught hard lessons, but it also offered redemption in time. The wind carried the scent of fresh earth and new beginnings across the fields. Elijah stood tall beside the man he loved and the father he had always needed. Together they faced whatever came next with open hearts and steady hands. The story of the Tarp became one they told with smiles instead of shame. Jonas knew he had almost lost everything, but had gained something even greater. The bond between father and son now included room for truth and for love. Summer heat settled over the Iowa farmland like a thick golden blanket. Jonas wiped his forehead and watched Elijah and Tyler repair the irrigation pipes. Their laughter floated across the rows of corn and eased the ache in his chest. He remembered the early days after the hospital, when every conversation felt fragile. Now those talks flowed naturally like the creek behind the old silo. The community picnic arrived, and the three men brought homemade pies to share. Neighbors nodded politely at first, then asked genuine questions about the farm. Jonas answered with a steady voice, proud of the life they had rebuilt. Elijah stood beside Tyler without hiding their joined hands under the picnic tables. The simple gesture meant more to Jonas than any sermon he had ever heard. Back home, that evening they sat on the porch and watched fireflies dance. Jonas spoke about his late wife and how she would have loved seeing them happy. Elijah shared stories from college, the ones he had kept secret for so long. Tyler listened and added his own memories of growing up in a different world. The night air felt lighter than it had in years, filled with possibility. Fall harvest came, and the fields turned into seas of golden grain. They worked from dawn until the stars came out, each man pulling his weight. Jonas noticed how Elijah's ideas improved the yield and saved them money. He told his son so openly and watched pride bloom on Elijah's face. The old barn received a fresh coat of red paint that brightened the whole property. Inside they hung new tools and cleared space for the truck that once held secrets. Jonas folded the tarp one last time and placed it on a high shelf. It would stay there as a reminder, not a weapon from the past. Winter brought holidays, and the house filled with the smell of pine and cinnamon. They decorated the tree together, choosing ornaments that told their new story. Jonas hung the photo of the three men right in the center where it belonged. Christmas morning brought gifts wrapped in simple paper and hearts full of thanks. Elijah gave his father a new leather journal to write down his thoughts. Jonas gave both young men a deed to the back 40 acres for their cabin. Tears flowed freely that morning, but they were tears of joy and healing. The new year arrived with fresh snow and renewed energy for the farm. They planned the spring planting and dreamed about expanding into organic crops. Jonas attended more support meetings and even spoke at one about his journey. His words encouraged other parents who sat in the circle with worried faces. Elijah and Tyler joined a local group for young couples on the land. They found friends who understood the balance between tradition and truth. The farm became known as a place where hard work and acceptance grew side by side. Spring rains nourished the soil, and the first green shoots pushed through. Jonas walked the fields with his son, pointing out improvements they had made. He admitted that Elijah's vision had saved the farm from financial ruin. The confession came easily now without the sting of old pride. Tyler proved invaluable with his mechanical skills and calm presence. The three men formed a team that no single storm could break apart. Summer festivals brought blue ribbons and new opportunities for the farm stand. Jonas stood behind the table selling sweet corn and answering questions with ease. He introduced Elijah and Tyler as his family and watched faces soften with understanding. The road that once felt broken now stretched ahead, smooth and full of light. Elijah no longer carried the weight of secrets that had nearly crushed him. He breathed freely under the wide, open sky and loved openly every day. Jonas found peace in watching his son thrive exactly as he was meant to. The whisper from under the tarp had become a turning point for all of them. It taught Jonas that love was bigger than any rule he had been taught. The farm continued its quiet rhythm through the seasons year after year. New calves were born, and old fences were mended with stronger hands. Laughter echoed from the porch where three chairs now rocked side by side. Jonas looked at the horizon and felt grateful for the unexpected path life took. He knew the journey was not over, but the foundation was solid now. Elijah and Tyler talked about marriage under the same stars that once witnessed fear. Jonas offered to walk his son down the aisle whenever they were ready. The words came from a heart that had learned to expand instead of close. The Iowa wind carried their voices across the fields like a gentle promise. Healing had taken root deep in the soil of their shared lives. The truth no longer needed to hide beneath any tarp or any silence. Jonas had regained his son and gained a new perspective on what family meant. The story of their family became one of courage and quiet transformation. Neighbors who once whispered now stopped by for coffee and honest conversation. The farm stood as a testament to the power of love over fear. Elijah smiled more freely, and Tyler felt truly at home on the land. Together they faced each day with the strength that only truth could give. Jonas walked the same paths he had known for decades, but saw them anew. The sun rose each morning over a world that felt reborn in understanding. Years passed on the farm, and the cabin on the back 40 became a home. Jonas visited often, bringing fresh bread from the kitchen and stories from town. He watched Elijah and Tyler build a life filled with love and hard work. The three men still gathered for Sunday dinners around the old oak table. Laughter filled the house where silence once pressed down like heavy stones. Jonas had become a different man, gentler, wiser, and more open to the world. He spoke at churches and community centers about the day the tarp came off. His message was simple: love your children even when their path surprises you. Elijah listened to his father with pride and shared his own experiences freely. The farm expanded and thrived under their combined efforts and shared vision. New equipment hummed in the fields, and the herd grew strong and healthy. Jonas sat on the porch one quiet evening watching the sunset paint the sky. He thought about the whisper that had changed everything in an instant. "I can't breathe" had become the words that taught him how to truly live. Elijah joined him with 2 cups of coffee and sat in the chair beside him. They spoke of the past without pain and of the future with excitement. Tyler waved from the garden where he tended the vegetables they grew together. The scene felt complete, and Jonas felt a deep sense of peace settle in. Life had taught him that family was not about control, but about connection. He had almost lost his son to the very rules meant to protect him. Now he cherished every moment and every truth they shared openly. The tarp remained folded on the shelf, a silent witness to their journey. No one needed to hide anymore under its heavy fabric or old expectations. The farm continued its steady work through rain and sun, through joy and challenge. Jonas knew the road had been long, but every step had been worth it. Elijah stood taller than ever with the love of his father and his partner. Together, they had turned a moment of shock into a lifetime of healing. The whisper that once meant fear now echoed as a call to live authentically. Jonas looked at the horizon and smiled, knowing they had come full circle. The American heartland stretched wide and welcoming under the endless sky. Their story proved that love could reshape even the most stubborn beliefs. The fields whispered back with the rustle of corn and the lowing of cattle. Jonas closed his eyes and breathed deeply, grateful for the second chance. Elijah and Tyler built memories that would last beyond any single lifetime. The family they formed was stronger because it was built on honesty. Jonas had learned that being a father meant growing alongside his child. The lesson came late, but it arrived with grace and lasting impact. The sun dipped below the hills, casting a warm glow over the land. 3 men sat together on the porch, united by bonds that could not break. The farm stood as proof that truth and love could coexist beautifully. Jonas knew he had done the hardest thing a parent could ever do. He had let go of old ideas to hold on to the son he cherished. The whisper under the tarp had saved them all in the end. Life moved forward with the quiet strength of the prairie winds. Healing had become their daily harvest, more valuable than any crop. True or false, a parent's deepest love always finds a way to accept the truth.